Chapter 8, the best sponsor company. Hint, there's only one. In the financial services business, there are two main types of companies. Stock companies, otherwise known as publicly traded companies, which are owned by their shareholders and can be either privately held or publicly traded. Two, mutual companies, which are not publicly traded but are instead owned by policyholders. Stock companies are typically names you would recognize because you can see their ticker symbol on the news. You can buy shares of those companies and sell them as you please. Mutual companies are often very large and old companies with storied histories dating back to the mid-19th century. Let's talk about the stock companies first. What happens with a life insurance policy sold by a stock company? Because of the makeup of stock companies and the complexity built into the fact that shareholders make all the decisions, there can be some challenges associated with choosing to work for a stock company. If you have experience working for a publicly traded company, you know the constant pressure to improve share price and drive the dividend every quarter. A report is due to shareholders to show how well the executives have added shareholder value. Often they achieve this with short-term and short-sighted tactics, which reduce costs and artificially inflate revenues to show a profit. While in some businesses, this may be a recipe for success, it's particularly dangerous in the financial services sector. To understand why, let's consider a life insurance policy that someone buys and then that policyholder dies 50 years later. A life insurance policy is nothing more than a promise to pay at some point in the future. The problem is that both the people making the promise at the time and the person being promised will typically not be there in the future to make sure any of that happens. The person who bought the policy on himself or herself has died and is not there to make sure the beneficiary is receiving the money that is due. And the company that made the promise, sold the insurance policy, may or may not still be in business. The executives who are running the company and the agent or advisor who sold the policy almost certainly aren't. You see, life insurance costs are determined by actuarial tables based on how long humans are expected to live. And then a company takes a presumed risk based on how aggressive they want to interpret these tables, along with an assertion on how much investment performance they're going to have, or the investment performance they're going to have on the premium dollars they collect while the client is still alive. Because executive compensation in a publicly traded company is based on stock performance, all an executive has to do is create some type of program that presents high value to a client at a low cost. If sales go through the roof, the company will show an initial spike in profit, thereby padding the executive's bonuses with hefty sums of money. And the clients seem to win in the short term as well. Just like the executives, agents can make a lot of sales if they're very competitive on their pricing. And the clients are excited because their premiums seem low. Problem doesn't arise until decades later when stockholders have come and gone, shareholder executives have come and gone, and perhaps even agents and advisors have come and gone. But the person who still owns that policy is now expecting the death benefit to be paid. This aggressive approach to pricing can create big problems if the company does not collect enough premium from policyholders and if their investment returns end up being lower than they expected. When this happens, there's not enough money in the reserve to pay the death claims. Then companies resort to acting on technicalities in contracts to deny death benefit claims. A company might get in financial trouble and end up paying only a fraction what was originally promised. Or perhaps they're bought by another company and the beneficiaries can't even track down what the new company is called and collect on their death benefit. These problems can arise and have arisen because clients chose to do business with publicly traded companies. I'm certainly not saying that all publicly traded financial companies are like this. You can tell by the genetic makeup and how profit is distributed that this can be problematic for clients. Another issue with publicly traded companies is that when the company is profitable and declares a dividend, the dividend does not go to the clients of the company, it goes to the shareholders of the company, or the outside interests. The only people a company has to make happy are the shareholders. And as we know, shareholders can be fickle. There's nothing to stop them from buying shares of the company one day and then selling their shares the next day. An issue agents and advisors can face when representing a publicly traded company is that a lot of the decisions that leadership makes internally are short-term focused. In other words, they invest too little money in infrastructure and support for their agents and advisors. They're focused on the next quarter's earnings report rather than the long term. As a sponsored entrepreneur, you want to know that the company sponsoring you has your back 100% and will make sure you are successful. In the ideal scenario, the company has no means of being successful without your success. This is where I find the biggest challenge in representing a publicly traded company. Now, let's look at the mutual companies. What happens with a life insurance policy sold by a mutual company? Because a mutual company is owned by its clients, when you, as the sponsored entrepreneur, create a new client relationship, those clients then become part owners in the company as long as they have participating policies. But even though they're part owners, they're the only owners. There are no outside interests that have any ownership in the company. Earlier, I described what could happen with a life insurance policy sold by a stock company. Now let's consider what happens with a life insurance policy sold by a mutual company. I heard it said once that mutual life insurance companies sell life insurance at cost. You might be thinking, no business sells things at cost. Traditionally speaking, you would be right, but let's think about this. Go back to those actuarial tables and investment performance standards that life insurance companies have to rely on to determine the pricing of their life insurance with a mutual company. They never want to be in a position where they don't have enough money to fulfill their promises to their clients, who are also the owners. If the company upsets these people, it's going to have big problems. So, the company executives take a conservative approach to how much they need to charge to fulfill their promises in the future. They know that dividends are the only mechanism by which they can return the amount of money they overcharged. They determine that a life insurance policy is going to cost consumers or clients a certain amount of money, and the clients continue to pay that premium. But because those clients are part owners in the company, every year that company is profitable, every year it gets better than expected investment returns and/or lower than expected expenses, the company pays a portion of that profit back to the clients in the form of dividends or a return of premium, which is often income tax-free. That means the clients of a mutual life insurance company are paying a lower net premium than those of a stock company, and it's delivered at what it costs to produce it. Now, why is all this important as you consider becoming a sponsored entrepreneur? The mutual company can take a long-term approach to the investment it makes, and because its agency field force, the group of sponsored entrepreneurs it sponsors, is its only form of profit, the company can make long-term investments in its infrastructure and support to make sure the entrepreneurs it sponsors are as successful as possible. Your success is their success, and their success is your client's success. Therefore, it creates a closed-loop circle. When you make promises to your clients you're providing value to, you can keep them consistently. You'll never have to apologize for unfulfilled expectations. Seek out a high-integrity company to sponsor you. Your sponsor must have your client's best interests at heart. That is, after all, why we joined this noble profession in the first place. This is the best model for getting into the financial services business and making sure there's 100% alignment among you, your client, and your sponsor. The process of selecting the right company can be arduous and confusing. It's important, and as you can see, you don't want to get it wrong. I can give you guidance on what your options are. My contact information appears later in this book. I encourage you, don't go it alone and reach out to me.